Good morning, church, and good to see all of you here this morning. For all of you here, for those who are here for the first time, this will be your first and last service in MEC. For the rest of us, this will be our last service in MEC because we are moving to our new place by next week. All right, so next week, don't come here for worship service. Next week, go to our new hall for our worship service. If you want to know where the location is, actually I don't know where what's the address is, but I know it is down this road. No, it's down this road. Okay, you go down this road, the next lane where brew house is. So you just turn in. I hope my directions are okay. You turn right where brew house is, and you go straight all the way to the end. There is a mamak shop called Padang Kota. I'm sure you are very familiar if you are here. There's a mamak shop. We are opposite the mamak shop, right? So if you see a bar downstairs by the name Starker, you are at the right place, all right? Because we are above the bar, all right? We got the place first, then the bar came in later on. So we didn't expect a bar to take over, beneath us. But it's okay, different kind of spirits fulfills everyone, yeah? Then if you come for Doxa, you can have a... No, I shouldn't say... Oh, no, I shouldn't say that. Yeah. You should just go straight up for Doxa, right? Don't hang around downstairs. You can hang around downstairs after the service. So, no, I shouldn't say that also. But anyway, next week we'll be there. It'll be our very first service there. Just to tease you a little bit, everything will look different, all right? We didn't just duplicate the whole design of this hall and bring it over there. Everything looks really different, so hope you're excited for it. Our opening ceremony will be on the 15th of December. It won't be next week because our president, Chinese Annual Conference president, will come and officially open this hall, even though we start using it first, all right? Why we put it 1 week after we go in is because we need to test run the entire system, because everything that we use there is brand new. So the whole team need to get used to it. You all need to get used to the hall so that there won't be any hiccups. So next week, we are moving to a new hall. On the 15th is our opening ceremony. Hope you all can join us for these next 2 days. Then after that, you want to come, you don't want to come, up to you all. All right. Anyway, let's go into our sermon for today. We're looking at the Gospel of Luke for Christmas. And this is a passage of Scripture that I have preached in 2016, many years ago. And now revisiting this passage of Scripture after 8 years have gone by, I think it has a lot of newer insights that I have drawn from this passage of Scripture. So we'll look at it together very quickly. We have only 3 points for today. And if you look at this whole passage of Scripture, the Gospel of Luke is very different from the other Gospels, in the sense that Luke's Gospel doesn't start off with the birth of Jesus like every other Gospels. Luke's Gospel decides to start off with a priest that was maybe hardly known, and he's by the name of Zechariah. And Luke's Gospel decides to focus on this man and his struggles in life. And the very first thing that we see from verse 5 onwards to verse 7 is that his wife was barren. We're going to focus a little bit on this word and what it really meant. So if you look at verses 5 to 7, it says that there was this priest, of the division of Abijah, and he had a wife from the daughters of Aaron. And then you go on, and then in verse 6, he even describes their person, right? They were both righteous before God. They walked blamelessly in all the commandments and statutes of the Lord. It means they were generally good people. The Gospel of Luke is not painting to us a picture that they were perfect people, but they were generally God-fearing good people, like all of us are here this morning, right? And then in verse 7, here comes the very sad or very stark contrast to what was said in verse 6. In verse 6, they are good people, righteous. And then in verse 7, it says, but they had no child because Elizabeth was barren. And then to add on to the insult, it says they were both advanced in years. And I think this is a real stark contrast from what is mentioned in verse 6 and then what Luke writes in verse 7. Now, look at Zechariah. He's a priest. And he's a priest that was chosen to go into the presence of God, the Holy of Holies. That's not something every priest gets to do. Only one priest gets to do it. And Zechariah, when they choose lots, right? It's not like, okay, let's just pick lots and see who gets to go in because I don't want to go in. No, it's not like that. There's a spiritual element to it where they believe the person who has been chosen is really chosen by God to enter that place because that person's life is worthy of coming into the presence of God and offering it prayers and sacrifices on behalf of all the Israelites. And so Zechariah was chosen. And you look at verse 6, it tells us that his life was in line with the reason why he was chosen. He was a really good man, a faithful priest, someone who faithfully served God till his old age. I don't think he was old as in above 60, but maybe he was roughly around 50 plus, mid-50s, all right? You look at Elizabeth. There's a reason why Luke also writes that Elizabeth was from the lineage of the line of Aaron. It's also a priestly line. A line that was chosen by God. A family line that was, blessed by God. But then somehow when it reached Elizabeth's, turn, she was barren. Right? Righteous and blameless, but barren in old age. To be barren back in those days is like a very bad social stigma. Because the Jews have this idea, they have this concept that righteousness always equals to having plenty of children. And that's why you go all the way back to the Old Testament, right? Prophet Samuel, his mother Hannah was barren as well. And she came before the Lord begging God for a child. Why? Why so desperate for a child? Because there was this social stigma that if you are barren, you are without child at an old age, you are a bad person. You must have done certain evil deeds to put you under the judgment of God. They equate barrenness with the judgment of God. And I think Luke is writing this whole passage, and putting it right at the start to bring an encouragement and to bring a new message, a new lesson to people that righteousness doesn't necessarily equate to blessings forever and ever. Righteousness doesn't always equals to having a perfect life without any issues. And then Luke is also trying to bring across this new lesson to people that being righteous doesn't mean that you won't have all these bad things happen to you, and bad things happening to you doesn't mean that you are a sinful person. And so this is the lesson that Luke was trying to bring across to his readers and to us today. I think this lesson is so meaningful, especially in our day and age today, where we think and we equate that a righteous person must never face any problem. And so if anyone is facing any problems or big problems in their life, then most likely they are living a life that is not right before God. This is a lesson that Luke is trying to remove from our midst and to tell us that righteousness can also come with problems. They can go hand in hand. But that doesn't mean God has abandoned you. That doesn't mean you're under the judgment of God or God is displeased with you. There's this very famous missionary by the name of Hudson Taylor. He's a missionary to China, one of the very first few missionaries to China. He served God faithfully all of his life. He was a pharmacist by trade, but he gave up his trade and he decided to go to China to bring the gospel to China. But Hudson Taylor's ministry, although it was a growing, flourishing ministry, his personal life, however, was not so great. He lost his children, he lost his wife at the age of 33. That's a very young age. That's my age, literally. And to lose his wife at that young age and serving God so faithfully, right? At the end of the day, Hudson Taylor penned this in his diary. And this is a very meaningful word, because I look at Hudson Taylor's life and what he went through, and it's very similar to what Zechariah went through with his wife. And this is what Hudson Taylor said in his diary after his wife died. He said, "What, can Jesus meet my need? Yes, and more than meet it. Because no matter how intricate my path, no matter how difficult my service, no matter how sad my bereavement, how far away my loved ones, no matter how helpless I am, how deep are my soul longings, Jesus can meet all and more than meet my needs." Such meaningful, powerful words after he lost his loved ones. Jesus can meet all. Sometimes problems exist in our life, not because we don't have Christ. Problems exist in our life, not because we are a sinful person. But problems sometimes exist in our life for no reason. We cannot really explain every single problem that happens in our life. We cannot really explain every single trial, struggles, or hardships that we face in life. But that is just the nature of life. But one thing we can know is that as a Christian, we have Christ in us. We have Christ as our hope. We have Christ as that anchor when life gets really challenging, when the waves and the storms of life threatens to topple us over and turn us away from God and drag us away from our relationship with God. We have Christ to anchor us down and hold us down. We have Christ who doesn't just sit far away and say, "You know what, handle your problems by yourself." No, we have Jesus there with us, who is there in the boat, who is there in the storms of life with us. And He's journeying with us through the storms. And one day with Christ with us, we will get out of this storm. And this is a beautiful reminder that whatever you're facing right now, maybe a very big challenge, a very big trial of life, remember this: Christ is with you. You are not alone. It's not that you've sinned against God. It's not that God is displeased with you. Problems of life exist. There might not be any explanation to it. But there's one thing that you can be sure of: God is with you. Jesus is with you. Zechariah was faithful as well, right? Very faithful. That's what the Bible tells us. It's not just in verse 6 that it describes his faithfulness, but in verse 8 to 10, you can see that in spite of his problems that he goes through, he continued to serve God. When he was chosen to go in and make prayers for the nation of Israel before the Lord, Zechariah never said to himself, "Well, no, God hasn't blessed me, so why do I need to pray for others, right? Why do I need to continue to serve this God who has not given me what I need? So I'll just give up and I'll just quit and I'll just leave." Zechariah continued to serve God. It says in verse 8, he was a priest before God. His division was on duty. And he was chosen to enter, to offer burnt incense before the Lord. And he went in and did his duty. He didn't just do it because it was his job, he was paid to do so. He did it with all of his heart. And it was in that holy of holies, Zechariah encountered God. Now sometimes we will think to ourselves, well, Zechariah is this great man of faith. That's why he could do it. He's this great, powerful priest that can forget about the problems of his life, that can forget about the issues that he's facing and just focus on God because he's trained to do so, because he is such a man. But if you look at the Bible verses later on in this passage of Scripture, we see that Zechariah actually had his moments of doubts. He had his fears. He had his worries. He had his questions that he brought before the Lord. Because you see, in this passage of Scripture, in verse 11, right, of Luke 1, he says, "An angel appeared to him while he was inside." And then in verse 12 it says, Zechariah was troubled when he saw the angel, and fear fell upon him. Why was he afraid? Go all the way down after the angel announced the good news to Zechariah, right? And then in verse 20, the angel says this to Zechariah. And behold, you will be silent and unable to speak until the day that these things take place, because you did not believe my words. Why was Zechariah afraid? Because I believe when he went into the Holy of Holies, he offered prayers for the nation of Israel. He did his duties right to the dot. But then, because he was there in the presence of the Lord, Zechariah took the time to bring his questions, bring his prayers before God, bring his personal request, his personal problem before God. And maybe in that time where he's praying to God, there were doubts, there were worries, there were many questions, and he just poured it all out before God in the presence of the Lord. And then an angel appeared before him. And Zechariah was afraid because he thought, maybe this time I've gone too far. Maybe I have offended God. But then the angel came, and the angel was not there to say, Zechariah, you have sinned against God with your questions. You have sinned against God with your doubts, and I'm here to judge you. Because that was the belief of that time, that if you have doubts, if you have worries, if you have sin in your life, you'll be struck dead before the presence of the Lord. And that's why he says Zechariah was filled with fear when he saw the angel, because he thought he had committed a sin. But then the angel came, and the angel gave him good news, that God has heard your prayer and God will answer your prayer. But wait for the timing of God. And that was great assurance for Zechariah. Great assurance for us as well today. Sometimes we think that when we talk about faithfulness in service, faithfulness in ministry, sometimes we think that faithfulness is without question. Faithfulness must be without doubt. You must just believe and have no questions at all. You must just believe and do not doubt God at all. I think that's not how the Christian faith works. Sometimes we think to ourselves that every time we doubt, every time we have questions, we are not growing spiritually. I like to change that idea, change that perspective. The more questions you ask, the more doubts you have, that's a sign of growth. The more whys you ask God, that is how you grow in your faith. The more times you come before God and wrestle with your faith and struggle with your faith, that is growth. And we see Zechariah had his struggles, he had his questions. But one thing that Zechariah did right is that he never gave up on God. And that is the key. As long as we keep struggling and wrestling, but keep holding on to God, one day we will receive and understand what the revelation of God truly means to us. Christian faith is not a faith where you just believe and ask no questions. Don't wrestle. You must not struggle with your faith. Because if you struggle, then you are a weak Christian. No. Someone who dares to struggle and ask the difficult question of the faith, that is a strong Christian. That is a Christian that will only get stronger and stronger and stronger. That's a Christian that really recognizes the grace and mercy and the love of God, the generosity of God. He welcomes you with your struggles. He welcomes you with your issues, with your doubts, with your fears, with your uncertainties. He welcomes you and He takes you in and He says, come, let me help you grow in your faith. And just like Zechariah, we can come to God with our questions. God doesn't say, you sinful child, you weak Christian. God says, come with your questions and let me help you. Let me help you resolve these questions bit by bit. Let me help you understand this faith. Let me help you grow in your faith. Faith with questions and doubts is a faith that is growing. But it can only grow if you continue to have faith in God. If you continue to hold on to God. If you continue to trust in Him even though you have your doubts, your worries, your struggles. Don't run away from God. Don't stop worshiping God. Be like Zechariah. Hold on to God. Keep running towards God with your questions. And one day you will get the answers to all the questions that you have. It might not be immediate. It might be a process. But if you come to God with your questions, the promise is this: you will get the answers to all of your questions. The last thing that we see is this element of silence. So the angel comes to Zechariah, gives him good news, wonderful news, right? But then the angel, before he leaves, tells Zechariah a very unique message, right? You will be silent. You will be unable to speak until the day that these things take place, because you did not believe my words, which will be fulfilled in their time. Now, sometimes we look at this from a very straightforward point of view to say that, all right, this was judgment from God, because Zechariah had doubts. And so now he was made mute. He was unable to speak because he offended God, right? And so that is his sort of like a punishment for him. But I think look at it in a different way. And the key to looking at it in a different way is the last sentence when the angel said, you will not speak because you did not believe my words, which will be fulfilled in their time. Then verse 23 says Zechariah went home to his home after everything was done. Look at it in a different way. God's response to Zechariah is this: be silent. And the silence that God is implying to Zechariah is not shut up, don't talk anymore. Because every word that's going to come out of you are going to be words of doubts and worries. Just shut up, all right? I'll zip up your mouth. I wouldn't let you talk now. Disappear. No, that's not what God was saying to Zechariah. But rather, God was saying to Zechariah, be silent. Just wait patiently. Don't fret any longer. Your questions, your doubts will be resolved in my time. So for now, I have heard your prayer. You don't have to come before me and keep complaining and keep asking why, when, how is it going to happen. Pause with all this. I have heard all your questions. Now, all you need to do is be silent, fret not, wait patiently, and watch my blessings pour out into your life. I like to think of God telling Zechariah to be silent as not the only occasion that this has happened. Elijah, a great prophet of God, was also taught the beauty of listening and waiting upon God in the silence of everything around him. You see, Elijah was running for his life because the evil queen Jezebel was pursuing him, wanting to kill him, right? And so he runs and flees to this cave. And this was the only time where Elijah did something without God telling him to do. All throughout his ministry, Elijah was very obedient to God. The scripture always tells us that God spoke, Elijah went. God spoke, Elijah did this. God spoke, Elijah did that. But this time, when the queen sent her soldiers to hunt him down and kill him, it did not say God spoke and Elijah went. It just says Elijah fled for his life. Out of fear, out of anxiety, he ran to the desert. He hid himself in one of the caves. And there, God met him. And God asked him this very amazing question, interesting question. Elijah, what are you doing here? I mean, if I was Elijah, I'll look at God and say, God, what do you think I'm doing here? Right? Someone's trying to kill me and you're asking me, what am I doing here? Well, you didn't show up. You didn't tell me where to go. You didn't speak when I needed you to speak. So I'm here and I'm waiting for you here in the protection of the cave. I guess that would be what I would say. And God, amazing, right? A 3-step process to deal with Elijah's anxiety. Elijah really wanted to die. He was so fearful for his life. And God made him food. So God fed him, filled up his stomach. And when he was full, and then God began to speak to him through different processes. There was storm, there was wind, there was fire, there was earthquake. And all these things, God made it happen. This big, huge display of God's power, God made it happen. But then, after each of these things died down, it was said that God was not heard in this big, supernatural, spectacular display of power. But when all the noises died down, when there was complete silence, it says, Elijah heard the still small voice of God. Silence. In Zechariah's time, God told Zechariah, you will be silent. You will not speak anymore. It's not judgment, but it's to teach you to wait patiently. Fret not anymore. Wait and watch God at work in his life. I guess sometimes in our life when we're going through the big struggles of life, the big challenges, the big trials of life, we can come before God with our prayers. We can come before God with our doubts, with our questions, with our big expressions of emotions. We can come before God with weeping and wailing and anger sometimes. But there will come a point where we also have to pause and be silent before God. There come a time where we have to just quiet down ourselves and wait for the still small voice of God to speak up into our lives. And when the still small voice of God speaks up in our life, I believe we will hear it. And we will know that that is God. And this still small voice of God will bring so much assurance to us, so much comfort, so much peace and joy, that maybe my problems now will not be resolved. But then that voice of God will be able to carry us through life with all its troubles, with all its messiness, with all its hardships. Sometimes this is all we need, to silence ourselves, to stop with the fretting, to stop with the complaining already. Because not that God is angry or upset with you, but God has already heard it. So now just wait patiently for God to respond and show up in your lives. Is silence what we need this period of Christmas? After all the different ups and downs that this year has brought us through. I believe if every one of us looks back on this entire year, you will realize that this year might not have been great for you personally. But then there are also good times, times to be thankful to God for. Maybe some of you are still fretting, complaining, coming before God with struggles. But right now, maybe God is asking you to quiet down your souls and to allow God to show up and speak words of comfort to you. Let us all pray.